Rocky Mountain Sasquatch. From time to time, Bigfoot is spotted on or near Yellowstone in the Tetons. We know of over a dozen reports of this elusive bipedal giant spotted along the east border of Yellowstone. These reports motivate our search for the creature in this area outside the east border of the park, from Cody through Sunlight Basin and into the Beartooth Mountains. Here are one of many reports that spurred our expedition and search into this beautiful, amazing, and remote area. Jerry writes RMSO. This is only the second time I've ever written this story down. In fact, I've only told it to one person before this. I'm 54 years old. I'm an educated man. I have a master's degree and spent most of my work career as a public school teacher and principal. This encounter took place when I was 12 years old, so it had to be 1979 in July or August. I grew up and still live in the metropolitan Detroit area. I'm not an only child, but was raised as one because my two sisters are 16 and 18 years older than I am. They were both married and moved out by the time I was 3. I tell you this because I'm the baby of the family, the youngest in my immediate family and youngest of all 19 of my grandmother's grandchildren. I've always, mostly in fun, been called the spoiled baby of the family. I was grandma's boy, and all 16 of my cousins and my two sisters knew it, so they liked to tease me about it, which is why I've sat on this story my entire life. I didn't want to give any of them any further ammo to use against me. That, and didn't think anyone would believe me. The summer of 1979, my mom and dad took me on a month-long vacation out west. We planned on going to South Dakota, Black Hills, and Little Bighorn, and Yellowstone National Park. My parents owned a motorhome, and that's what we took our trip in. It wasn't huge, about 32 feet long. We were in either Montana or Wyoming near Yellowstone. I was 12, so I didn't pay that much attention. We had been traveling for about a week and a half. We had already been to the Black Hills, Little Bighorn, and Mount Rushmore. We were somewhere near Yellowstone, but not in the park. We had stopped in the late afternoon at a campground to spend the night. Being the only kid in my family on this trip, I was always looking for other kids to hang out with when we stopped. This particular day, I met some other kids, 3 of them, in the campground, and they were about my age. At first it was fun hanging out and around and talking to them while playing on the playground equipment. After a while, though, they started to get mean with me. I was a little overweight as a child, so they started calling me names and teasing me about my weight. I soon left the playground and stayed away from them the rest of the day. A little time through the late afternoon and evening, they rode past our campsite on their bikes and made some rude remarks about me and laughing. I was thick-skinned, excuse my pun, so I didn't let it get to me too much. Our family ate dinner and had a campfire after dark. We retired to the motorhome for the night. My parents slept in the back of the RV where the main dining room table folded down into a bed. I slept in the front of the RV where the couch folded down into a bed. The couch bed was against the wall on the driver's side of the RV with the window above it. I lay there in the dark going over the day's events in my head and started to drift off to sleep. I was almost asleep when I was pulled out of it by a tapping sound outside the RV wall directly outside from my bed. I had heard similar sounds before when it rained or condensation from the rooftop AC. I thought it was the water from the AC dripping down outside the camper, and so I ignored it and started to go back to sleep. The tapping of the water hitting the fiberglass camper persisted as I tried to doze off. Then all of a sudden there was a loud bang, like someone hit the outside of the RV with their fist. Then it went back to tapping as if dripping water again. I tried to ignore it and passed it off as nothing and tried to go to sleep. The tapping continued, and after a few minutes of it, the loud bang on the side of the RV came again. This time I knew it wasn't water. Immediately my mind went to the 3 mean boys I met earlier that day. I figured it was them trying to mess with me and or scare me. The tapping started again, then a minute later the bang again. Now I was angry that these boys were hitting my family's RV. The tapping started again. I planned on waiting for the bang, then yanking the blind up on the window and try to catch them in the act. I sat up with my hand on the drawstring of the blind, listening to the tapping, which had started again. I was anxiously waiting for the bang so I could yank the drawstring and catch them. After a minute or so of the tapping came the bang again. I yanked the cord, and the shade flew up, and I pressed my face up against the glass to look down on the boys. To my horror, I didn't see any boys. What I saw still haunts me to this day. When I yanked the drawstring and looked out the window there, staring back at me was a huge hairy face, inches from mine, looking back at me. The window was about 5 or 6 feet off the ground to the bottom of the window and probably 7 or 8 feet to the top of the window. This giant hairy face wasn't looking directly at me. The creature the face belonged to was actually hunched over to look into the window. The owner of the face had to be 8 or 9 feet tall to have bent down to look into the window. I was instantly terrified beyond all belief. There was no sound. After a few seconds, I let go of the drawstring and the shade fell back into the closed position. I sat there in my bed motionless, frozen with fear. I don't know how long I sat there before I lay back down in the bed. I never heard the tapping sound or banging again and never lifted the shade again. Eventually, I fell asleep. I awoke the next morning in the daylight to the RV traveling down the road, as I did almost every morning of the trip. I never told my parents about the previous night. I never told anyone until now. I have no explanation of what I saw. I just know it scared me, like I've never been scared before or since. At the time, I'd never heard of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Not too many years later, I saw an episode of In the Search of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy on TV. It was about Bigfoot. At that moment, I knew that was what I had seen outside the RV window that night. RMSO responds, "Hi Jerry, appreciate hearing from you. I enjoyed reading your encounter. Reminds me of a Bigfoot encounter south of Yellowstone in the Tetons where the Bigfoot was looking into a motorhome window at night. Do you recall the creature's hair color, skin color, or any other details like a width estimate of the face, head, or shoulders? If you can recall what the face looked like, human, ape, or something different?" Jerry continues, "I'll give you what I can remember. Not only was it a lifetime ago, but the terror I felt that night doesn't let me recall many small details about that creature. I'll answer your questions in the order you asked them. Hair color. It was dark outside and dark in the RV, so I cannot be 100% sure of the true color. Knowing that, the hair color looked a deep brown or even possibly a black. It had very little hair on its face, and the hair that was closest to its face was lighter in color than the rest of the hair I could see. I didn't really look up and down its body as I pulled the drawstring on the shade and was looking down. It didn't register immediately what I was looking at, which was legs, abdomen, and torso. By the time my eyes traveled up its body and my eyes reached the upper torso neck area, I was already feeling the chills run down my spine as goosebumps came over my arms. This is because although I didn't yet fully realize what I was looking at, somehow I knew it was something I'd never seen before. The instant I saw its face, we locked eyes until I let the blind fall back into the closed position. It seemed like we were staring at each other for more than a minute, but in reality it was probably closer to 10 seconds. I cannot say with confidence about hair color below the neck. I use the word neck as a reference point, but there wasn't a discernible neck that I could see. Skin color. Its facial skin was lighter than the hair. It certainly wasn't a pinkish color like Caucasian people, nor was it very dark like an African American person. It was somewhere in between. I'd say more like a tan. Eyes. It didn't have a wild animal like eyes. They seemed more inquisitive, like you'd see when you're looking into the eyes of a dolphin or other intelligent mammals. Mouth and nose. Its nose was very wide and flat, like the nose of a boxer nearing the end of his career. I don't recall it having any difference in color from the rest of its face. Its mouth was slightly open like it was breathing through its nose and mouth. The short glimpse I had inside its mouth didn't provide me with any details about color or teeth. Its head was enormous, as big as, probably even bigger than that of a fully grown silverback gorilla. I've heard others describe the head as being slightly cone-shaped, but I don't recall if its head was or wasn't the shape like that. Overall size, from the ground to the top of the window, was an easy 8 feet. This creature had to be hunched over to look into the window. I cannot say how tall it was, but it was more than 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were extremely broad. I would guess that if it stretched its arms out to the sides, its wingspan was 10 feet or better. While we stared at each other, it had its right arm down its side and the left arm was on the RV above to my right, his left of the window. My best estimate is that it had to weigh in the neighborhood of 800 pounds. Its face. It was very human-like face, but weathered, I'm sure from a life spent outdoors. The thing that struck me the most about it was its eyes, like I described earlier as inquisitive. The eyes gave me the feeling that I wasn't looking into a wild animal like a bear or wolf. It wasn't the eyes of a creature that ran solely on instinct, but had an intelligence to them, like it was capable of thought and self-awareness. Now, this is just the feeling I got looking into the eyes. There was no actual proof of the intelligence, but it was the feeling it gave me. That was the part that scared me the most. Not that it was huge and strong, but that it possessed intelligence that would allow it to open a door to think, reason, and plan. Anything that size and human-like intelligence would make this the most dangerous creature on Earth other than mankind. As I wrote this for you, I wrestled with the words it and creature. I almost feel that I'm doing it a disservice by not calling it by him or her. No idea what the gender was. To this day, its intelligence I saw in the eyes is what terrifies me the most. Most of my adult life, I've flip-flopped between wanting to go on a Sasquatch expedition with serious and established Bigfoot researchers in search of the answers to questions that haunt me and never wanting to step foot in the wilderness again. RMSO responds, appreciate all of the additional information. Wow, what an amazing encounter for those of us that get to hear about it. I am sure it was a terrifying experience for you at the time. For anyone it would be. I know the Yellowstone and surrounding areas very well. Grew up spending my summers near the Jackson area. Parents and family had a camping property, so we would head up to the Tetons in Yellowstone often. The last 10 years or so, I have investigated dozens of Bigfoot sighting locations in and around those areas too. From what you recall, I would guess that you and your parents were camping somewhere between Cody and Wyoming at the east gate of Yellowstone that night. That is the most active area in the Yellowstone area along the border near the east gate. Jerry continues, my parents have both passed, so I have no one to ask about our exact location the night of the encounter. I do remember at some point going into the town of Cody. I know two things only about our location. One, we were definitely nearest the eastern part of Yellowstone that night. Two, I'm almost positive that the campground we stayed in at was a private campground and not on a state national park campground. The campsite we were in was at the outer edge of the campground. We were backed in, and the rear of the motorhome was facing the woods. I do not know how much of the area behind the RV was forest, but it was my belief that walking off in the woods in that direction would lead you into thousands of acres of wilderness. I don't believe going in that direction someone would encounter a road, town, homes, or any other signs of civilization. The reason I say that is whenever we stopped, I always asked the park rangers or whomever was at the desk questions about the surrounding area. When we camped in Michigan, I always wandered into the forest around a lake or up and down a stream. I was scared to do that out west solely for the fact I knew we were in grizzly country. When we stopped at a park in South Dakota in the Badlands, I saw a lonely tree out in the Badlands that looked like it was a few hundred yards away. When I voiced my intention of walking out to it, the ranger told me I shouldn't do that because although the tree looked like it was not too far away, he said it was actually about 3 miles away. He went on to say that the distances in the Badlands were very deceiving because of the flatness of the ground and the distortion, the heat in the air, and I didn't try it after hearing that. To give you a little perspective on myself, I was a public school teacher and principal for more than 20 years. I was a science teacher and always been very science oriented, as in applying scientific process to things. The encounter is the only event in my life that steps out of the lines of known science. As Occam's razor states, the simplest explanation is usually the right explanation, but I know in my head and heart that it doesn't apply in this encounter. RMSO responds, sounds like you were a smart kid with great street smarts. We are always very careful when we are on expeditions to this area, camping and hiking, because it is bear country. We have come across many grizzly and black bears. This expedition where we visited the area we believe could be where you had your Bigfoot encounter, along with visiting several other Bigfoot sighting locations, we encountered 3 different black bear over a 2-day period and 4 moose that week. Moose can also be very dangerous. This is wild, rugged, and remote country. Beautiful. No wonder Bigfoot thrives and lives in this area. Hope you enjoyed this Bigfoot sighting report, along with a look at a Bigfoot sighting area between Cody, Sunlight Basin, Beartooth Mountains. There's just a plethora of Bigfoot sighting reports, including the Teton areas. Just an amazing, beautiful area. Keep on watching. We're going to keep on squatching.
That's the third bear we've seen. Cool, the next pull out, I'm gonna pull the SD card so I have him.
He was a big one.
Good find, Brody.
Or he looked big. Did he cross the road?
Yep. He was fluffy.
I need to like sit with my elbow here in the middle.
Oh, here.
So I can look up the front windshield.
Okay.
Thought it was a cow at first. Nope, that's bear.
That's what I thought at first when I saw it. I'm like, cow? And then you're like, bear.
Funny how they're just not nervous.
Zillions and zillions of cars they see, they're so desensitized to them.